The silence in the courtroom felt heavy, like the air before a mortar strike. My brother stood up, his face twisted in rage. "He's just a homeless veteran," Mark screamed, his voice cracking against the marble walls. I didn't flinch. I simply walked forward and placed a single sheet of paper on the judge's desk. She read it once, then looked up with eyes like flint. "Lock the doors," she commanded. "No one leaves this room." Dad turned away, Mom trembled, and my brother froze. 48 hours earlier. The only thing locking me out was a gate I didn't recognize. I stepped out of the cab onto the pavement of Windmere Lane, my boots crunching on familiar gravel. The air smelled of rain and pine, a scent that had kept me grounded through 3 deployments. But the house itself felt wrong. The yellow siding was gone, replaced by a sterile, modern gray. "A. For sale" sign tilted in the yard. Digging into the lawn where I once learned to catch a baseball, I approached the new security keypad, its blue light blinking a sharp rhythm. My key, a brass relic I had carried for 25 years, was useless here. I pressed the buzzer, waiting for my mother's voice. Instead, static crackled, followed by an annoyed tone. "Deliveries go to the side entrance." It was Mark. "It's Leo," I said, leaning closer to the speaker. "I'm home." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, loaded silence of a trench line right before the shooting starts. "You can't be here." Mark's voice returned, devoid of any brotherly warmth. "Mom and Dad aren't seeing visitors." I gripped the strap of my duffel bag tighter. "I am not a visitor, Mark. I live here." "Open the gate." I heard a scoff through the speaker, harsh and dismissive. "You don't live anywhere, Leo. You've been gone for decades. You aren't even in the will anymore. Go away." The connection cut with a sharp click, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk, while the porch light flickered off. I didn't leave. I stood there, staring at the window where my room used to be, slept, waiting for my parents to intervene. They never appeared. 10 minutes later, blue and red lights washed over the gray siding. A patrol car rolled up to the curb, tires crunching on the asphalt. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters. They looked young, the same age I was when I first deployed. "Sir," the taller one called out, keeping his distance. "We got a report of a trespasser." I handed over my military ID. The officer glanced at it, then at the house. "Lieutenant Colonel," he muttered, handing it back. "Look, the owner says you are frightening the residents. You need to move along." The owner. I looked past him at the sign in the yard. In the bottom corner, in small print, it didn't list my parents' names. It said Vanguard Holdings LLC. As I walked away, the rain began to fall, and I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an ambush. The coffee at the diner tasted like battery acid and burnt beans. I sat in a booth near the back, watching rain streak against the glass, distorting the gray world outside. Across from me, Sarah tapped on her tablet, her face illuminated by the device's harsh blue glow. She hadn't changed since our days in intelligence. She was still sharp, focused, and dangerously quiet. "You look like hell, Leo," she said without looking up. I didn't argue. Being erased by your own family tends to leave a mark. She spun the tablet around, sliding it across the sticky laminate table. A property listing filled the screen, bright and offensive. "I pulled the county clerk records this morning," Sarah said, her voice low to avoid eager ears. 1450 Windmere Lane isn't owned by your parents anymore. It was sold 3 months ago." I stared at the screen. The price was significantly under market value, a quick cash grab. My stomach tightened. "Sold to who?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. The owner was Vanguard Holdings LLC. Sarah swiped to the next image, a scanned copy of the transfer deed. At the bottom, in black ink, was a signature that looked terrifyingly familiar. "Is that yours?" she asked. I traced the loops of the L on the screen. It was perfect, mechanical even. "It looks like mine," I admitted. "But look at the date. It was dated the 12th of June. "I was in a blackout zone in Syria on the 12th of June, I said. "I didn't sign anything but a duty log." "I know," Sarah replied, pulling up a new window. "That's why I dug into Vanguard Holdings." The screen populated with a corporate structure chart. It was a labyrinth of shell accounts, but Sarah had cut straight to the center. Two names sat at the top of the executive summary. Mark served as the logistics contact. My father, Arthur, was listed as the authorizing agent. The betrayal wasn't just my brother's greed. It was a coordinated strike. My father had signed off on my erasure. I leaned back against the vinyl booth, the air leaving my lungs. Mark was weak, always chasing a fast buck, but Dad was supposed to be the bedrock. "They must be in trouble," I murmured. "Dad wouldn't do this unless he was desperate." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her expression pitying but firm. "Desperate doesn't cover it, Leo." I tracked the transfer funds. The money didn't go to medical bills or debts. It went to offshore accounts linked to high-stakes gambling sites. "There is something else," she said, zooming in on the deed's notary stamp. It belonged to a woman named Beatrice Holt. "Notice anything about the stamp?" I shook my head. "It looks standard." Sarah tapped the screen hard. "Beatrice Holt died of a stroke 2 years ago. Her commission expired with her." The room seemed to tilt. They hadn't just forged my signature. They had resurrected a dead woman to validate the theft. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. And it was a felony. I looked out the window again, but the rain didn't look like gloom anymore. It looked like cover. "They think I am just a homeless vet," I said, my voice hardening. "They think I have no resources." Sarah shut the tablet case with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet diner. "Then let's prove them wrong," she said. "They didn't just steal a house, Leo. They built a lie on a foundation of corpses. We just need to start digging." The neon sign of the Star Light Motel buzzed with a rhythmic, dying insect sound outside my window. Inside room 104, the air smelled of stale tobacco and harsh industrial cleaner. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the battered footlocker at my feet. It was the only thing I had left from before the service, a heavy steel box painted olive drab. My grandfather, a man of iron principles, had given it to me the day I enlisted. I flipped the rusty latches, the metal screeching in the quiet room. Inside, amidst moth-eaten wool blankets and old letters, sat a heavy, fireproof drive. It wasn't much to look at, just a matte black brick with a single connection port. Grandfather called it the family archive. He didn't trust banks, and after seeing what my father had done to my inheritance, I understood why. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The fan whirred to life, sounding like a distant plane. A password prompt blinked on the screen, a simple white cursor pulsing against a black void. My fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. I typed the only thing that made sense: the grid coordinates of the hill where he taught me to hunt. The screen flashed green, unlocking folders labeled by year. I bypassed the childhood photos and went straight to the folder marked Legal. I wasn't just looking for a file. I was looking for a weapon to fight back. I clicked on a PDF titled Final Will and Testament. Verified. The document opened crisp and undeniable. Slept. I scrolled to the property section, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until I found the clause. I hereby leave the estate at 1450 Windmere Lane to my grandson, Leo, sole beneficiary. It was dated 3 days before he died. The signature is bold, jagged, and real. It was nothing like the smooth, forged autograph Mark had filed with the county clerk. There was another file, a video clip labeled, "Read Me." I adjusted the volume and hit play. My grandfather's face filled the screen, grainy but commanding. He was sitting in his study, the very room my father had just sold out from under me. "Leo," he rasped, his voice scraping against the speakers. "If you are watching this, then the vultures have started circling." He looked directly into the lens, his eyes sharp with an intelligence that had clearly skipped a generation. "I know your father." The recording continued, the audio hissing slightly. "Arthur has a weak spine and expensive tastes. He will try to take what isn't his." The old man leaned forward, the camera focus adjusting on his silver hair. "I have hidden the original physical deed inside the cornerstone of the fireplace. Do not trust the copies." I paused the video. The fireplace. The truth was literally cemented into the foundation of the stolen home. They couldn't scrub that away. I closed the laptop, the screen's light fading into the darkness of the motel room. The evidence was undeniable. I had the digital proof, and now I knew where the physical anchor lay. But as I reached for my phone to call Sarah, a notification chimed. It was an automated alert from the Perimeter app linked to the drive. Someone else had just attempted to access the cloud backup of this very folder. The vultures weren't just circling. They were hunting me. Sarah's office was a bunker of cooling fans and glowing monitors buried deep in a converted warehouse. The air hummed with the sound of servers processing data, a digital heartbeat that matched my own racing pulse. I paced the concrete floor while Sarah typed furiously, her glasses reflecting streams of cascading code. "The intrusion attempt on your drive came from a burner IP," she said, her fingers never stopping. "But they made a mistake. They tried to backtrace the source transfer." I followed the breadcrumbs from the Vanguard Holdings purchase, Sarah announced, pulling up a spiderweb diagram on the main screen. The lines were red and angry, connecting my house to a dozen other nodes. The sale price for Windmere Lane was deposited into a holding account in the Caymans. She clicked a node, expanding it for me to see. Then it moved to a shell corporation called Redchip Ventures. "Leo, look at the withdrawals. They aren't business expenses. They're gambling losses." I stepped closer, studying the timestamps. The withdrawals matched the dates of major sporting events perfectly. "Mark," I spat, the name tasting like ash. "He's always had a problem, but this is millions." Sarah nodded grimly. "He's in deep, Leo. Deeper than just your inheritance. Vanguard isn't just stealing your home. They're liquidating assets from multiple dormant estates. They target veterans who are deployed or hospitalized. Your brother isn't just a thief. He's a predator feeding on his own kind." "And my father?" I asked, though I feared the answer more than anything. Sarah highlighted a recurring authorization code on the screen. "Arthur approves every transaction. He's the face that makes it look legal to the banks." The image of my father, a man who once taught me to shake hands firmly, crumbled in my mind. He wasn't a victim of Mark's schemes. He was the architect's partner. They were cannibalizing the lives of men and women who were serving. Sarah started compiling the data into a single file she called the kill chain. "We have the flow of funds," she said, her voice rising with adrenaline. "We have the forged deed. We have the pattern of targeting deployed service members. She hit a key, and a printer in the corner whirred to life. "This is a Rado case, Leo. Federal racketeering. If we hand this to the FBI, they go away for 20 years. We have them cold. We need to be careful," I warned, grabbing the warm pages from the printer tray. "If they know we have this, they might destroy the physical deed in the fireplace before we can get a warrant." Sarah stood up, stretching her neck. "We file the injunction tomorrow morning. Freeze their assets. Stop them from running." It felt like a solid plan. A soldier's plan. But as we strategized, my phone buzzed on the metal desk, vibrating violently against the steel. I picked it up. A process server had just tagged my location electronically. "What is it?" Sarah asked, seeing my expression darken. I held up the screen. It was a digital notification of a restraining order filed by Mark. "He claims I am suffering from severe PTSD, induced aggression." I read, my voice flat. "He's submitted my confidential therapy notes from my last tour." They weren't just stealing my house anymore. They were weaponizing my service history to paint me as a monster. The deputy handed me the papers with a look that said he already believed the lie. I stood in the doorway, the heavy envelope feeling like lead. Inside wasn't just a restraining order, it was a character assassination. Attached are pages from my post, deployment sessions, redacted to make me look like a ticking time bomb. Hyper, vigilance, and aggression were highlighted in neon yellow. Mark wasn't just blocking me. He was ensuring no judge would ever trust my word again. Sarah snatched the papers, her face flushing with anger. "This is a HIPAA violation," she snapped, pacing the cramped room. "We can bury them for this alone." She started listing federal statutes, but I raised a hand to stop her. I pushed the anger down. This was tactical. They wanted me to explode. They wanted the angry veteran to storm the house and prove them right. "Let them file it," I said quietly. "It only proves they're scared." My phone buzzed against the laminate nightstand. It was a text from a number I hadn't heard from in years. "Arthur. Don't come to court, Leo. We can settle this. $50,000. Just sign the release and go." I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. That was the price of my birthright. That was what he thought my dignity was worth. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was trying to buy my silence before the gavel fell. "Don't reply," Sarah warned, reading over my shoulder. "If you negotiate, it looks like an admission of guilt." I deleted the thread without responding. We needed a new strategy for the hearing tomorrow. "We go in silent," I told her. "Let them think they're winning." Sarah looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "We lure them into perjury," she whispered. "We let them lie on the record." It was a gamble, but it was the only way to win. The rain finally stopped, leaving the asphalt slick under the streetlights. I needed air, so I walked to the edge of the parking lot. The humidity clung to my skin, reminding me of nights on guard duty. I wasn't fighting insurgents this time. I was fighting the people who taught me how to walk. The betrayal felt heavy, a dull ache that no armor could stop. I lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the damp night air. A black sedan rolled slowly past the motel entrance. Its headlights cut. I recognized the scratch on the fender. It was Dad's car. Mark was behind the wheel. He didn't see me standing in the shadows. His face was illuminated by the dashboard lights, pale and sweating. He wasn't looking for me with anger. He was looking with panic. He was gnawing on his fingernails, a nervous habit he'd had since he was 10. He looked like a cornered animal. Seeing him like that changed everything. Mark wasn't fighting for the house because he wanted to live there. He was fighting Because without that asset to liquidate, the people he owed money to would come for him. If we won tomorrow, I wouldn't just be reclaiming my home. I would be signing my brother's death warrant. Or at least his prison sentence. I dropped the cigarette and crushed it under my boot. The war would end tomorrow. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old paper, a scent that usually meant justice, but today smelled like a trap. I sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped tight to keep them from trembling. Across the aisle, my family's lawyer, a man named Sterling with a smile like a shark, paced before the bench. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "We are dealing with a man broken by war. A man who confuses his own violent delusions with reality." He pointed a manicured finger at me. I wanted to stand up and shout, but Sarah's hand rested gently on my forearm, a silent command to hold the line. She scribbled on her legal pad, her expression bored, almost detached. "Let them build the gallows," she had whispered earlier. I forced my breathing to slow, focusing on the judge, a stern woman named Hernandez who watched the proceedings with hawk-like intensity. Sterling continued to weave a narrative of my instability, citing the redacted medical files Mark had stolen. They were turning my service into a weapon. When they called my father to the stand, the air left the room. Arthur walked slowly, leaning on a cane I'd never seen him use before. He avoided my eyes, staring fixedly at the court seal on the wall. "Mr. Thatcher," Sterling asked gently, "why did you transfer the property to Vanguard Holdings?" Arthur cleared his throat, a dry, rattling sound. "To protect it," he lied, his voice trembling. "Leo came back. Different. Erratic. We needed the equity to ensure he couldn't destroy the family home." The lie hit harder than shrapnel. He wasn't just stealing the house. He was rewriting history to make me the villain in my own life. I remembered him teaching me to ride a bike on that driveway, promising he'd always catch me. Now, he was pushing me into traffic. Sarah didn't object. She let the silence stretch, allowing the judge to absorb Arthur's rehearsed frailty. He stepped down, looking gray and diminished, and I realized with a sick jolt that he had sold his soul for Mark's gambling debts. Mark was next. He bounded to the stand, his confidence fueled by his father's performance. He wore a navy suit that cost more than my first car. But it couldn't hide the nervous sweat beading on his upper lip. "My brother threatened us," Mark testified, looking directly at the judge with wide, innocent eyes. "He came to the gate screaming. He said he'd burn the place down if we didn't let him in. We were terrified. That's why I called the police. We just want to be safe." Sarah finally stood. She didn't approach the podium with aggression. She walked over like she was confused. "Mr. Thatcher," she said softly, "you claim you sold the house to Vanguard Holdings for fair market value, correct?" Mark nodded vigorously. "Yes. To secure our parents' retirement." Sarah smiled, a dangerous, predatory expression that didn't reach her eyes. "And the deed?" she continued, holding up a copy of the forged document. "You witnessed my client sign this personally, on the date listed." "I did." Mark lied, his voice steady. "He came by in June. He signed it right at the kitchen table." I gripped the edge of the table. June. I was 7,000 miles away in a sandbox. But Mark didn't know that. He was improvising, building the cage around himself. Sarah nodded slowly. "And the notary?" "Beatrice Holt. She was present." Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shrugged. "Yes. She was there. She stamped it right in front of us." Sarah's demeanor shifted instantly. The confusion vanished, replaced by cold steel. "Then why, Mr. Thatcher, Did the funds from this sale transfer immediately to an offshore account in the Caymans? Mark blinked, his rhythm broken. That's estate planning, he stammered. It's complex. Sarah took a step closer. It doesn't look complex, Mark. It looks like laundering. It looks like you sold a house you didn't own to pay off bookies in Vegas. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Mark's face turned a violent shade of red. He stood up, gripping the railing of the witness box, until his knuckles turned white. This is harassment, he shouted, looking at the judge for help that wasn't coming. I'm a businessman. He's nothing. He pointed a shaking finger at me. He's just a homeless veteran. He wants a handout because he can't hold a job. The words echoed off the high ceiling, crude and ugly. The courtroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Mark panted, his chest heaving, realizing too late that he had screamed the quiet part out loud. Judge Hernandez didn't bang her gavel. She just stared at him, her expression shifting from impartial to icy disdain. The court reporter's hands hovered over her keys. Mark sank back into the chair, the arrogance draining out of him as the echo of his insult faded. Sarah looked at me and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was time. I reached for the folder on the table. The silence following Mark's outburst was thick enough to choke on. He stood there, chest heaving, waiting for applause or agreement that never came. I didn't look at him. I looked at Judge Hernandez, whose face had gone dangerously blank, stripping away any patience she had left. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Your Honor, I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. I have one piece of evidence the defense forgot to mention. May I approach the bench? The walk to the front felt like crossing a minefield. I could feel Mark's eyes burning into my back, confused and angry, but I focused on the wood grain of the dais. I held the folder with both hands, treating it with the reverence of a flag. Sarah remained seated, her pen hovering over her pad, watching the dominoes align. I reached the bench and placed the single document on the polished wood. It wasn't the deed. It was the federal death certificate of Beatrice Holt. Judge Hernandez adjusted her glasses and pulled the paper closer. She read the name. She read the date of death. Then she picked up the forged deed Mark had just sworn to, placing them side by side. The math was impossible. A woman dead for 2 years could not notarize a sale in June. The judge's eyes widened, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. She looked at Mark, who was now straightening his tie, oblivious to the fact that the floor had just dropped out. She didn't look at the lawyers. She looked at the bailiff standing by the rear exit. Lock the doors, she commanded, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. No one leaves this room. The bailiff moved instantly, the heavy oak doors booming shut with a sound that vibrated in my chest. A ripple of panic went through the gallery. Mark froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Your Honor, Sterling stammered, standing up. What is the meaning of this? Sit down, counsel. Hernandez snapped, not looking away from Mark. She tapped the document I had given her. This court has just been presented with irrefutable proof of perjury and fraud. She held up the death certificate. The notary on your client's deed has been deceased since 2023. Unless she signed this from the grave. Mr. Thatcher, you have committed a felony in my courtroom. Mark's face went pale, the blood draining away so fast he looked like a ghost. The judge wasn't finished. She picked up the file Sarah had submitted under seal just minutes ago. I also have a forensic trace of the sale funds, she announced, reading for the record. Transfer to Vanguard Holdings. Immediate wire to Red Chip Ventures. Withdrawal at staggering sums in Las Vegas. She looked at Arthur, who was staring at his hands. This isn't an eviction case anymore, she said, her voice trembling with controlled rage. This is a federal crime scene. Bailiff. Take them into custody. The side doors burst open, and 4 officers marched in. They didn't look like the local deputies who had kicked me off my porch. These were court marshals. Mark tried to back away, knocking over his chair. "No! It's a mistake!" he shrieked as they grabbed him. The click of the handcuffs was loud and final. He thrashed, looking wild, looking at me with pure hatred. "You did this!" he screamed. "You ruined everything." I didn't say a word. I just watched him break. Arthur didn't fight. When the officer touched his shoulder, he stood up slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked fragile, a hollow shell of the man who had raised me. Mom sat in the front row, trembling so hard her purse slipped from her lap, spilling tissues onto the floor. She didn't reach for them. She just covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. They hadn't just lost the house. They had lost their freedom, their reputation, and their son, all in 5 minutes. As they led Arthur past the plaintiff's table, he paused. The marshal tugged his arm, but Dad planted his feet. He looked at me, his eyes watery and red. "You were supposed to just go away, Leo," he whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "Why couldn't you just let it go?" I looked at him, feeling the last tether of childhood loyalty snap. "Because you taught me to defend my home," I said quietly. "I didn't leave, Dad. I went to get the truth." The heavy doors opened to drag them out, letting in a draft of cold hallway air. The silence that followed was different now. It was clean. Judge Hernandez looked at me, her expression softening just a fraction. "The deed to 1450 Windmere Lane is restored to the rightful heir, effective immediately," she ruled, banging her gavel. The sound rang out, sharp and decisive. I looked at the table. I had my house back. But looking at the empty defense chairs, I knew the cost was absolute. The local news cycle burned through the story in 48 hours. Headlines shifted from family fraud to veterans justice, painting me as a hero who slew the dragon. I didn't feel like a hero. I sat in my motel room, watching the anchors discuss my father's sentencing, as if it were a sports score. Arthur got 10 years for racketeering. Mark got 12. It was a victory on paper, but it felt like an amputation. I turned off the television, preferring the static silence of the empty room. I drove to 1450 Windmere Lane on a Tuesday morning. The police tape was gone, fluttering in the gutter like a dead bird. The keypad gate stood open, its battery finally dead after days of neglect. I walked up the driveway, expecting to feel a surge of ownership, but the house just looked tired. The gray siding was dull under the overcast sky. I unlocked the front door with the keys the marshal had given me. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and Mark's expensive cologne. I walked to the living room fireplace, the stone hearth where my grandfather had hidden the truth. I pried the loose stone free and retrieved the oilskin packet. I looked at the empty walls where family photos used to hang. My parents had packed them away before the sale, erasing us before they even left. I realized then that I couldn't live here. This place was a mausoleum of lies. I placed the keys on the mantel. I wasn't reclaiming a home. I was excavating a grave. An hour later, a van from the Veterans Housing Coalition pulled into the driveway. A woman named Elena stepped out, looking at the house with wide, hopeful eyes. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Thatcher?" she asked, holding the donation paperwork as if it were fragile. "It's a lot of equity to give away." I signed the line without hesitation. "It's not giving it away," I told her. "It's giving it back." I handed her the deed. For the first time, the house looked warm again. I stopped at the post office before hitting the highway. There was a single envelope in my box, stamped with the county jail's insignia. It wasn't an apology. It was a returned commissary check I had sent to my mother, rejected because I hadn't followed the proper visitation protocol. Even in a cage, they were trying to dictate the terms of our relationship. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt light. I fed the envelope into the lobby shredder, watching the last of my obligations turn into confetti. I drove west until the road ran out, and the Pacific Ocean filled the windshield. The salt air here was clean, untainted by courtrooms or old secrets. I sat on the hood of my car, watching the waves crash against the rocks, relentless and free. My grandfather was right about the truth leaving a trace, but he forgot to mention that the truth also sets you free. Mark called me a homeless veteran. He was wrong. I was never homeless. I just had to clean the house.